Hello, everybody. We're going to get started here in just a minute. I just wanted to come on and go over a couple of logistics. So this is your attendee panel. So I'm going to go over this in just a minute. Just familiarize yourself with it in the meantime, and hang tight. I will be back on momentarily. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So hello, everybody. My name is Kristen Galden, and I am with Hand to Mind. Oh, let me get rid of the thing that's popping up on the screen. I am going to just go through a couple of housekeeping things here with you, and then I'm going to pass it off to Maria. We're very excited to have her today, and she's going to kind of walk you through doing read alouds. So before that, this is what your follow-up email will look like that you will receive later. I have it set to be sent out a few hours after the webinar ends. So it will be later on this evening. In that email, and check your spam folder because sometimes it does go there, especially if you're using your school email address. That contains the link to the recording for you to watch. All you have to do is put in your name and it will allow you to watch the recording. You can share that. But then you also have the certificate of attendance. The certificate is very general. It is just, sort of a certificate that says that you attended a 1-hour webinar with Hand to Mind. You can try to turn that in for credit. Some administrators will give credit, some won't. So it just kind of depends. But that if you did attend the entire webinar, the certificate will be in that email. This does not apply to those of you who are watching this recording later. This is only for the live attendees. So while I get things over to Maria here, I am going to actually launch a poll. Maria, I'm going to make you the presenter, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the poll. So everybody, if you can just answer the poll that comes up in your panel. So it should allow you to just click directly on the poll in the panel. So this one is asking what your role is. So choose the one that best fits your role currently. All right, we've got about 70% voted. So, okay, we have 32% are K2 teachers. So pretty large amount, and then 35% are other. And then I have one more for you. How often do you do read alouds in your classroom or at your district if you are not a classroom teacher? Oh, good. Good answers. So I should get the Jeopardy music for this every time I say that, don't I?
I think so. Do 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 do. I can do it. Do 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 do.
That's what I was thinking. Okay, we are at 43% split even between daily and several times a week.
All right. That sounds great.
I am going to close that out. Thank you guys. And Maria, we can see your screen, so you're ready to roll.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks to Hand to Mind for having me here this afternoon to chat about read alouds, my favorite topic. And you can see on the screen that there is a book where the cover is masked. And if you feel creative this afternoon, you can go ahead and pop what you predict that title of that book might be. You can put that in the chat. And also in the chat, you will find a link to the handout for today. So any resources or books or things that I talk about are linked into that handout. And if for some reason you can't access it there, it's also on my website, which I'll share a bit later. So I am looking to see if anyone is chatting here. Not yet. That's okay. Put it in your head, like you would say to the kids. Put the title in your head, and we're going to get started this afternoon. So we're here this afternoon to talk a little bit about read alouds and how they transform early literacy instruction. And we're going to, of course, start a read aloud. So the title of that book is called Nobody Like a Book. And this is something, predict the title is something that you can do with your students in your classroom, whether you are live this year, remote, or hybrid. Just simply masking the title and inviting students to predict what that title might be. They can do it on a sticky note, they can do it on a whiteboard if you are virtual, any way that you choose to do it. When you have students predict the title, it really encourages them to look carefully at that cover illustration. And oftentimes what I've found is that students' predictions are always better sometimes than the author's predictions. And so what I say to the kids is, well, kids, that's great. You have your own title for a story that you could write. So this book that we're going to start with this afternoon is called Nobody Like a Book by Ellen Wolf. And if you love books as much as I do, you might want to open your library cart and put the titles in there, or your indie bookstore cart and put the titles in there, because I'm going to be sharing a lot of books. Nobody Like a Book. It goes like this. It's a rhyming book. It's just beautiful. It says, oh, I skipped ahead. I'm going to go one back. We learn why icebergs stay afloat and why Titanics sink. We learn to play harmonica. We learn to bake and cook. We learn to read and write. There's nobody like a book. And it goes on in this rhyming pattern throughout the text. I visit any world I wish and never leave my chair. There's nobody like a book to make me feel I'm there. And certainly, you know, we've almost lived a year now in this pandemic, and I know books have been a comfort to me, comfort to my students. There is nobody like a book. If you're looking for other recently published books to celebrate reading, Nobody Like a Book is here. Book's Big Adventure is a wonderful book about a book that is brand new for a while in the library and goes on lots of adventures. But as it ages, it doesn't get used as much. And then it is shared with a child, and that child takes the book on new adventures. And then in the middle is Malcolm Mitchell's. If you haven't seen his book, my favorite book in the whole wide world, it's about a boy looking for his favorite book. And when he can't find it, he decides to write his own. So it really has that reading-writing connection. So this is me. I taught first grade for 34 years. So I started my career in DeKalb, Illinois. I live in Aurora, Illinois now. If any of you are from Illinois, you know we're having some beautiful weather today. Then I always say, you know, the best thing about teaching is you get the best gifts. So this is a sculpture of me made entirely out of toilet paper, which I've kept all these years. And I didn't realize that this year in particular, it would be worth a lot of money, because you know how rare toilet paper was to get. So this year, past May, I transitioned from full-time teaching. I, quote, retired in the pandemic, planned long before the pandemic, to being a traveling teacher. So I went from spending 34 years in first grade to spending some time in my office with kids. I'm so fortunate that I have lots. Well, and I think this is one of the wonderful things about what we've learned from this time is, you know, this morning I was teaching kindergartners poetry in Connecticut. You know, this afternoon I'm here with you. Tonight I'm going to be in Wisconsin at a reading council. So we're able to travel in new and different ways. My best teacher friend teaches kindergarten. This is her remote classroom, and I go to what I call Kathy Kindergarten once a week to see what she's doing and how she's doing it. So I have the good fortune to be in and out of lots of classrooms, and I've written a lot of books. Happy to talk about any of them, but today we're here really to talk about Read Aloud. So here are today's goals for you. I want to celebrate books. I want to spark some ideas because I know it's March. One of my dear retired colleagues always called this time of year March, April, May, because you just kind of squish it together. And this year in particular, I know everything. The yo-yo of being in school, out of school, hybrid, not hybrid, all of that has been so challenging. So hopefully I can spark a few new ideas for this last bit of the school year, and also really think about how we can simplify our instruction. Those really are my lifelong teaching goals. It's something that I've worked toward. In this picture, you see the 303 picture books that made it into the Ramped Up Read Aloud. I had to read a lot of other books that didn't make it, not that they weren't great, but when we pick the books that we read with our children, our time is so precious. We really have to be very intentional in that selection. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So Read Aloud does a lot for your students. We know the research shows us that it models skilled reading and sparks conversation and encourages empathy and fosters community. And when we started in last March, when we were forced into virtual teaching, teachers across the nation reached out to publishers and other booksellers and said, how can you help us continue to read aloud? So we really saw how important Read Aloud was to all of us, and especially our students. What I want to focus in on in our time together this afternoon is what you surround Read Aloud with, and that's conversation, and particularly collaborative conversations. So students talking among students. And I know how difficult that is when you're masked and you're socially distanced, or you're doing that through a screen. But I'm going to show you some strategies that might be helpful, whatever the teaching setting you're experiencing right now. This is an anchor chart, and I gave you the link to the mini lesson that goes with this anchor chart. At the beginning of the year with learners, I spend time really talking to them about that language of conversation. How when you say to students, turn and talk, or pop an idea in the chat, you want them to link their thinking. Just picture those linking. You can get them at Hand to Mind, I'm sure. They look like linking paper clips. And when we teach this mini lesson, that's what I use, those paper clips, and we talk about how my idea builds on your idea, and so forth and so on. And when we talk and think together, our ideas grow. So I teach very intentional language. I always say we because I worked with a team for 25 years and we did everything together, so it's hard not to say we. We talk to kids about the language that we're going to use, and you can see some of this language. You know, I have the same thinking. That's very helpful because we all know what happens when kids have the same thinking. They usually say, well, he stole my idea. So if you can teach kids this language, that helps to take care of that. The language that I shared on that chart and the language that I try to use with my students came really from the work of Peter Johnston. If you are not familiar with his work, either in Choice Words or this book, Opening Minds, or his latest book, Engaging Literate Minds, it's a great summer professional reading experience. And what he says to us is that we are not teaching reading and writing, we are teaching people who read and write, with the focus on teaching children. And we've seen this certainly during the pandemic, how important well-being and social and emotional learning is for all of us, and particularly for our children. So as we go through the rest of our time together and I share books and ideas with you, I want you to frame those in this collaborative conversation students are having with each other. And also the idea that my goal when I'm reading with students and having these interactions is to focus on the fact that I'm teaching a little person. So let's talk about how we might start this work. So when we're thinking about collaborative conversations, and we're doing that across the miles or through a screen, we have to think differently. So this is an example of how you might do that if you are teaching virtually. This is a book called Harold Loves His Woolly Hat. And if you're anywhere cold, you might be, it's getting a little warm here in Illinois, but still a great book. So it's a book about this little bear, Harold, who loves his woolly hat. But one day his woolly hat is taken away by a crow. And in this particular read aloud experience, I was talking to kids about characters, and we were really thinking about how we understand characters through their actions, through the things that they do, and their words, or the dialogue in the story, or the things that they say. And I was doing this in a small group, and we were doing it virtually. These were first graders. So as we were reading along, when the crow takes Harold's woolly hat away, and the page says this, it says, "Then one day a crow swoops down and steals Harold's woolly hat. Now I look just like all the other bears," thinks Harold. "How will anyone know that I am a very special bear?" So I asked the children, I said, well, can you infer how Harold is feeling? And you can see in the chat, we have disappointed, down, blue, very, very upset, friendless, upset, angry, cheerless, worried. Now you'll notice here that the students did not use words like happy, sad, or mad. And that was because we spent time at the beginning of the year with this group talking about other words for happy, sad, or mad. And we made a chart that we could project during read alouds that said, what are other words you can use if you want to really talk about characters' feelings. So that's something to put on your to-do list if you've never done that with kids, just making lists of other words other than happy, sad, or mad to have that conversation. Later in the book, Harold has made many attempts to get his hat back. And finally, he says, there's just one thing left for Harold to do. And this is a perfect page to predict. What's your prediction? What do you think Harold's going to do? And when I said earlier that the idea of collaborative conversations allows or invites children to build on each other's thinking, that can happen even virtually in a chat. So you can see here, the first blue arrow points to Wenzi's thoughts at the beginning. Wenzi's like, I'm not sure. And I said, that's okay, buddy. Let's just see what other people have to say. And so he read, that Nandan said he was going to whine or steal the hat back when he was sleeping. Gotham said he climbs up and gets his hat. Maybe, I don't know. Getting a ladder. And then you can see Wenzi comes back in and says he's going to use a rope to get it. And I said, buddy, oh my goodness, look what just happened. Your brain grew. Because at first you weren't sure. And then you listened to what your friends were saying and you built on their thinking and had an idea. The same thing happened for Amaya. You can see here, Amaya came in with, I don't know, I don't have any predictions. And then I love this one, tell them out loud when they, please give my hat back. And then she comes back in and she says she's going to use some manners. That's what Harold should do. And my favorite here is Arna, help take care of the bebe. And I didn't say this to Arna, but I was like, well, have you been watching Schitt's Creek? I don't know. So then in the end, we ended with that idea that we started with. How do we know about a character? We know about a character through their actions, and we know about a character through their words. So my question was, what word would you use to describe Harold? And those of you who work with the littlest kids know that this is sometimes tricky because they want to tell what the character did. It's very challenging sometimes for them to get to the adjective, so to help them with that, I prompted, Harold is clever, Harold is unhappy, and so forth. And that sometimes helps to get them past Harold got his hat back, Harold, tried lots of things, telling what they do instead of what they're like. Also, one other idea for virtual teaching is this, and you can use this live or hybrid, especially with mass. We learned this idea early on when we, were home with nothing and kids had nothing. We didn't send the go bag home yet. We took a piece of paper. We told kids, okay, take a piece of white paper, fold it in fourths, color 1/4 green, 1/4 blue, 1/4 red and 1/4 yellow. And if you don't have paper, then find something that are those colors. And we use those color cards for everything because they're so flexible. So you can see across the bottom of the screen, my teammate Kathy, who teaches kindergarten, was using them in a morning message. She said, true or false, wind is missing air. Today, blue is going to be true and yellow is going to be false. Show me what you think. And so it's just a quick way to get feedback. I know we use whiteboards for feedback, lots of different ways, but the colored cards were just a brilliant idea that I got from one of my colleagues in my school district. So I'm going to pause and let you process for a minute. And if you have any questions or anything you're thinking or wondering, you can go ahead and pop that in the chat, and then you can read it out or I can answer your questions. All right, I don't see any. If any of my helpers see any, you can unmute and let me know. All right, so next, what I want to think about is setting up these read aloud experiences that really promote conversation. And one way to do that is through illustration study, really digging in and thinking about the illustrations in a story. And I want you to look at this cover of the book Bear Came Along. You might have this book, but you might not have noticed that there's something very unusual about this cover. It's rare, doesn't happen very often. I'll give you a minute just to look and see if you notice anything about the cover that's different than some of the other picture book covers you have. It takes kids a while. Sometimes they notice and sometimes they don't. But notice that neither the author or the illustrator's name is on the cover. It was a very intentional decision, I assume. I don't know the author and illustrator, so I can only guess. But that's something to talk to kids about. Why would they choose not to have their names on the cover? Pretty much every other book that we've seen has their names on the cover. So I have a video here and we tried it before. I don't think it is playing, so I'm just gonna play it and do a little narration. So this is illustration study in a virtual video of a read aloud. I choose to record my own read alouds because I want to do some teaching along the way. And when I was recording this read aloud, I was very purposeful. I'm just gonna see about talking about the different parts of the book and also how the illustrations were going to change over time. So here I am telling the kids about exactly what I told you, that that their names aren't on the cover. And then when you're looking at the spine, so we looked at the spine of the book, and then we're going to unwrap the book and look at the book case and see how that's different than the book jacket. And then we're going to take a look at these end papers, and the end papers in this book are really important because you can see these are very sepia toned end papers. But when you get to the end of the book, the end papers completely change, just as the book does over time. So again, you can see that the pictures here are very sepia toned, but eventually they turn color. The other thing that I did in this read aloud is I recorded music behind my words. I just used iMovie, and that just makes your read alouds even more fun if you're choosing to record them and send them home with kids. So I'm gonna stop that. I don't know if you know about, oh, you don't want to see that again. Hang on, there we go. So this is my high-tech setup for recording read alouds. I just took 2 milk crates and a piece of board and I stuck my phone above it, and that's how I was able to project down and just get the book. I had already built a relationship with these students. They didn't need to see my face. I wanted them to focus really on the book. And this is available if you're interested in this. This is available in on our literacy workshop on my website. You can find it if you want that picture. Now, I don't know if you've seen this or not. If you haven't, this is something you might want to look for to spice up your read alouds here from March till March, April, May. And that's the Novel Effect. It's a phone app that you can get. It is voice activated. So as you're reading a book aloud, it makes sound effects and adds music. So it's fun to get it on your phone. It's free. I'm sure there's also a paid version. I just have a free one. It's fine. As you're reading, it activates, and so what's fun is to do it without telling your kids and see if they notice. I would say early on when I first started using it, my one critique of the app was it didn't have as many inclusive and diverse books as I would have liked to see. I do see that they are working on that, but that's something just to watch to make sure that the books that you're sharing with children are, as Rudine Sims Bishop says, windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. So when we think about illustration study, we can take what we did in the whole group into our small groups and have kids interacting with each other. Now, again, I realize that social distancing or physical distancing has made this a little more challenging, but I still think you can make this work in your classrooms if you're live. What we did here for predicting is we predicted with pieces of a book cover. And I got this idea from Smokey Daniels. Some of you might know Harvey Smokey Daniels. And he was talking about illustration study just with images. And in a workshop, he took an image and divided it into 4 quadrants. And he had each group study 1 quadrant. And then we came together to talk about the whole. And when he said that, I thought, oh my goodness, we could do that with the cover of a book. So what I did is I broke a book into quadrants, and I gave each group a part of the book. I chose to do more than 4 because I always had 28 students. So that way there'd be less kids around the little piece of the book. So I did 8 sections. And as kids would go around the room and look at each section, they would see what they noticed. They would talk about what they thought the book might be about. And then they would kind of have to hold that section in their head and get to the next part like a puzzle and try to put it all together. In the end, we'd come together and I just put magnet pieces on the back and we put it on the board, and then we talked about it, and then we read the book to see, what they noticed from the cover, if their predictions matched the author's thinking, how that experience enhanced their reading. Now, I know it's not easy to cut apart a book cover, and my husband's really handy with graphics, so I gave you a link to these 5 covers already blown up and cut apart. And they're all great for spring. So I don't know if you've seen any of these books, but Rocket Says Clean Up is about a little girl who wants to clean up the beach because it's full of plastic. One Little Bag is a wordless book by Henry Cole about a boy who keeps a brown lunch bag for years and years. One Day in a Eucalyptus Tree is just a fun book to read. And then of course, Bruce's Big Storm, probably some storms coming soon. So that might be a book that you choose. So these are, if you don't have the handout, these are all posted on my website under free resources. And you can try this with your kids and email me and let me know how it goes. Another way, and I tried to put in here because what I've heard from a lot of teachers this year is that engagement, especially through the screen, is challenging. So I tried to really include ideas that draw kids into the read aloud, like predicting the title, like predicting with pieces, or this idea which is called Peek and Predict. And this idea, Kath and I wrote a book together, and we got this from a book for emerging bilingual learners, or a way to build language. And what you do is you simply wrap a picture book. Don't go out and get fancy wrapping paper, just use construction paper. It's actually better because you can purposely tear the construction paper in places that you want to. So this is a book called Julia and the House of Lost Creatures, which is magnificent for predicting. It's actually one of the books in Ramped Up Read Aloud. And then what you can do here is just tear a little bit and have kids have that conversation. What do you notice? What are you thinking? What might this be? Why do you think that? All of those questions that we saw at the beginning. Then you can tear off another little section and continue the conversation. And you're really teaching kids that idea of we predict and revise based on new information. We predict, then we get more information, then we revise. We do that when we look at illustrations. We also do that as readers. And then finally, you can have them see this part. And if you haven't read this book, Julia's House of Lost Creatures, you can see this little piece here is actually on the back of a turtle. And the turtle in the second book about Julia moves. So it's a lot of fun. The kids don't really notice that at first. So those are just ideas to get kids drawn in, focus on that conversation, help them to see how predicting works and how we revise our predictions based on the new information we gain either from the text or from the illustrations. Next, we're going to talk about big ideas, themes, morals, lessons, or whatever terminology you use with your students. And if you haven't seen Maria Walther's wonderful books, Those Shoes you've probably seen, and A Bike Like Sergio's, these are great books for talking about theme, moral, or what we like to call big ideas. And also on my website, people often ask, are any of the books that you feature in Ramped Up Read Aloud available in Spanish? So on my website, I do have a list of the books that are, both of these happen to be available in Spanish also. And so there is a list on there if you have that question. So we're going to talk about A Bike Like Sergio's. If you're not familiar with that book, it's about a little boy who wants a bike like Sergio's. One day he's at the store and the woman in front of him drops what he thinks is a dollar bill, but it turns out to be $100 bill. He picks it up, he puts it in his pocket, he takes it home, and then he has to make some decisions. Along the way, he loses the $100 bill. And now he has gained a bit more empathy for how it feels when you have this money and it's gone. So here's the big ending of the book. And like a hot blast, I remember how it was for me when that money that was hers and then mine was gone. I leave the juice behind, and this time I follow her. So he does return the money. Spoiler alert, sorry about that. And this is what his family says when he comes home. At home, everyone is waiting, and the lost and found story is mine to tell. What you did wasn't easy, my dad says, setting his hand on my shoulder, but it was right, and my mom pulls me close. So if you were talking to kids about this book, you might be hearing big ideas like give something back that you find, and so on and so forth. So one way that you can dig in during a read aloud is have students write before, during, and after reading. You can do it on a piece of paper. You could have them do it on a whiteboard. They could do it on sticky notes. It doesn't have to be fancy. Before reading, you take a look at the cover, just like we've been doing and talking about, and have kids, write a question, what they're thinking, what they're noticing. During reading, I usually stop at a pivotal point, and again, let students reflect on what they're thinking, what they're noticing, and then at the end, if I'm working on big ideas, I might ask them, what do you think the big idea is? And I share this work sample here because I might be looking at it saying, wow, so neat. Look at the handwriting, look at those illustrations. And you're right, it is fantastic, beautiful work. But if you read the words, what you find is this child still comprehending at a literal level. And that's why I love to have kids write, because it's a way into their mind. So you can see when I asked, what do you infer the big idea of A Bike Like Sergio's is, this child responded, I infer the big idea is, on his birthday, he will get a bike. And while that might be true, it really shows me that he wasn't yet comprehending at that higher level. So now I have that formative assessment data to pull a group of kids together and say, hey kids, come together. You know what, let's go back over A Bike Like Sergio's today, and let's talk about what the big idea is. So that's a way to informally assess students' listening comprehension, and then form some groups based on how they're doing. This is another example, and writing is, children can only write at their own level. So writing is a way to differentiate instruction across your year and across your day. So here, the same experience, we're doing the same book, reading the same experience, but this child was digging in a lot deeper. So she said, I think the moral of the story, because she wanted to use the word moral, not big idea. I think the moral of the story is if you find something on the floor, give it back to the owner. And then he's thinking, I should give this back to the owner. And there's the $100 bill. So you can see the difference in the thinking. And when we go back to that piece, they're both beautifully done. I learned from one of my bilingual teacher friends, or she teaches emerging bilingual students, that oftentimes as teachers, we commit what she called assume-acide. We look at this piece of work and we assume comprehension, great, but we always have to make sure that we're digging in and not making those assumptions. If you're looking for other books for big ideas, of course, Last Stop on Market Street is a wonderful book. And if you have not seen Matt De La Pena and Christian Robinson's latest book called Milo Imagines the World, you have to run to the library bookstore and get it, because it is a beautiful book. If you know Last Stop on Market Street, you know that CJ and his grandma were on the bus on their way, and where they ended up is a soup kitchen, and you really didn't know that the whole way through the bus ride, but you learned a lot of other things. Similarly, Milo and his sister are on a subway, and they're on their way to somewhere you don't know until the end of the book, and I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to spoil it. And along the way, Milo sees people on the subway and imagines their world. And he comes to find out that what he imagined maybe wasn't true, so that the outward appearance doesn't necessarily tell you everything you need to know about a person. So beautiful, beautiful book. Check it out. Also for big ideas, if you haven't seen Evelyn Del Rey is Moving Away, it's just a book about two friends who have a fabulous day on their last day together before Evelyn moves. And the big idea obviously is friendship and lasting friendship, and it ends this way. It ends with I can't remember her name, sorry, the other girl, not Evelyn, as an adult looking back to those lifetime friendships. And I don't know about you, but for me during the pandemic, it's been friendships, and especially those that, people that you've known a long, long time, that have helped me to get through this very challenging time. So if you're looking, when we're digging into big ideas, it's helpful for students to dig in across text. So to create a text set, this is a text set about friendship and moving. So you can see, and I think this year, because we've moved in and out of settings, children have moved in and out of our classrooms, sometimes they're virtual, then they're back. So this is a great text set, particularly for this year, but these are all books about friendship and moving. You could pick two that speak to you and your students, and then you can compare and contrast how the different authors and illustrators dealt with that big idea of friendship and moving. So I'm going to pause again just to see if you have any other questions or anything you're wondering. And so I can drink some water. The next book I want to share is Jabari Jumps, also an old favorite. And when we think back to what Peter Johnston told us, that we're teaching people who read and write, I think this year in particular, there's a lot of fear. And so helping children to overcome their fears and think about fear is something that's important to have that conversation with kids. So Jabari Jumps, I'm sure you know this book. It's about a young boy who wants to jump off the diving board, and then of course gets a little afraid when he gets up there. And his dad has some wise advice for him. It's okay to feel a little scared, his dad says. Sometimes if I feel a little scared, I take a deep breath and tell myself I'm ready. And you know what? Sometimes it stops feeling scary and feels a little like a surprise. And Jabari loves surprises. When we're thinking about writing and responding to reading, especially this year in our compressed times, quick writes are a great way to get kids writing and thinking alongside a text. If you're familiar with Linda Reef's work around quick writes, what she says to us is that you have kids write next to or about a piece of text, a powerful poem. And that got me thinking, well, why couldn't we do that with one page of a picture book? And so here in Jabari Jumps, if you know the book, this is where he's on the edge of the diving board. You could choose to do this quick write before reading the book, show this image, say to students, okay, pretend, this is a boy, or you don't even have to name him at that point. I guess you could if you had shown the cover. This is Jabari. Pretend you're him at this very point. What are you thinking? And what are you saying to yourself? And have kids write alongside that. Again, they could do it on a Post-it, it can be on a whiteboard. And I'm saying that over and over because I am a huge believer in a blank piece of paper, blank whiteboard. We do not need, kids don't need clip art on their paper. Kids don't need fancy stuff. Just a blank piece of paper works just fine. Then we can take Jabari and pair it with another book called Hannah and Sugar. They are both about overcoming fears. And as I read these books aloud, we really explored how the characters' feelings changed over time. So Jabari at the beginning of the story was excited and confident and brave. And then when he didn't want to jump off the diving board, he became unsure, nervous, and scared. And then I showed you that page. That was the turning point where Dad gave him that wise advice. And then at the end, spoiler alert, he was happy, confident, brave, and excited. So we kind of looked at how that plot went through time. And then we took Hannah and Sugar and did the same work with that during our read aloud experience. So we can take that read aloud experience, and that's the other multi-purpose use of read aloud, is everything that I've shown you in read aloud is a bridge to guiding readers in small groups. So when I'm talking about predicting in read aloud, then I can bring that into my small group conversations. So I really see read aloud as that bridge. So when we think about what we just saw with Jabari and with Hannah, and how we were looking at how a character's feelings change over time, I can bring that into my small group work. So in this case, I was using a short read, Scholastic Short Reads. It was Midas and the Golden Touch. So we had done the work I showed you on that chart. We had talked about how feelings change over time. Then I gave them the scaffold card. The scaffold card is based on the work of Jan Richardson. I just recreated her cards. They're on my website. You have the link to make them more visual for younger learners. So we took the scaffold card and I said to kids, I gave them 3 Post-it notes and I said, at the beginning of the story, I want you to write down how King Midas is feeling. In the middle of the story, and I put the Post-its on the card. In the middle, write down how he's feeling at the end. So as we were reading and talking and conferring through this book in a small group, the children did that. After reading, then they responded. So they had their Post-its, they had that conversation that we had in the 2 read alouds prior to that, and they were able to write a response. I think that King Midas learned his lesson by his daughter, because when he bent down to kiss her, she turned into pure and solid gold. King Midas was happy and excited at the beginning because for his wish to come true at the beginning. Disappointed because everything he touches will turn into gold in the middle, and surprised, excited, and happy at the end because his dearly and most lovingly daughter was back. And so this response, as James Britton would say, floats on a sea of talk, the talk that surrounded the read alouds, the talk that we had in our small group. Then a child was able to take their 3 sticky notes with the words that they described King Midas and create a response. If you love Jabari Jumps, then you need to look for Jabari Tries. In this book, Jabari wants to make a flying machine. He's really not that happy that his sister wants to help him. So like Jabari Jumps, Dad gives him some wise advice. We took this into the small group really to talk about beginning, middle, and end. In the beginning, he wants to make a flying machine. In the middle, he lets his sister be his partner. And at the end, they were able to create the flying machine by working together. So it has a very clear beginning, middle, and end, which, by the way, is challenging because I've been working with Kathy, my kindergarten colleague, to try to find stories just with a clear beginning, middle, and end. And although it seems like that should be so simple, it is not. It is challenging. Finally, I just want to end with this big idea as we look toward summer reading programs, as we think about other experiences to engage and re-engage students in learning, that Read Aloud is a springboard to inquiry. So I'm involved right now in a grant program in my school district. We are running a after-school program for students in our Title I building about literacy. And so when we were posed with this project, my colleague and I said, okay, well, first of all, A, it's after school. B, kids have been on a screen all day. Like, we have got to do something that's going to make them come back and stick with us for 14 weeks. So what we decided to do is pair picture books with inquiry experiences. And I gave you the link to all the books, and I'm happy to talk to anyone about this. If you're interested, you can just email me. But what we did is we took a book like Vamos, Let's Go to the Market, about food. And our first session was all about food. So we talked about Vamos. We gave them this little lunchline food joke book. And then we gave them some modeling clay. And in this experience, there are first graders through fifth graders. And we said to, hey kids, and remember we're doing this virtually, so they have modeling clay at home. We said, all right, we've been talking all about food. Create or invent your own food and make it out of clay. And I wasn't sure. I've taught first grade my whole career. I wasn't sure if a fifth grader is going to want to model something out of clay. They loved it. So they had a great time. Last week, or yesterday, we met for the second time, and this was, we read In a Jar, which is all about collections, and we talked about collections, and kids shared their collection, and then we gave them some rocks, and we sorted rocks, and made all kinds of rocky observations. So if you are creating any kind of program for after school, for summer, I think to me the key is 1, inquiry, and 2, engagement. And the books and materials that we chose to send home, again, funded by a grant, were all what we considered like lifelong books. So although I love the picture book In a Jar, we did not choose to have that one of their take-home books. We chose my book of rock and minerals, because that's a book that they can refer back to, share with an older brother, or the big kids could share with a sibling. If they decide to collect rocks, they can use it as a resource. So I think when we're thinking about how Read Aloud leads to inquiry, that can be a very engaging way to hook kids into reading. Like I can tell you that little lunch line book there, I mean, kids were reading, like we've had to finally say, okay, kids, it's time to shut off the Zoom now. Mrs. Walsh and I want to go have some dinner. No more jokes. You can tell some jokes to your family. So when we think about inquiry and reaching out, we're going to end with a book. This is called Outside In. It was one of the books that I had my husband cut apart in pieces for you, if you're interested. It is an absolutely beautiful book, and I think it's just so fitting for right now. It starts really talking about how in the past, we as humans used to spend a lot of time outside, but now we forget outside is there. And a great question to pose to your learners is, why do you think Deborah Underwood chose to capitalize the word outside in this book? Ponder that. Now, sometimes even when we're outside, we're inside. So much to ponder. What happens throughout the book is outside sneaks in, sneaks in, sneaks in, and this is the ending. I'm here, outside says, I miss you. And we answer. So hopefully, if it's beautiful where you live right now, you can shut down your screen in a bit and get outside, because it is calling you. I'm here. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I'm most active on Twitter. Try to tweet ideas for teachers. And thanks for coming today. And thanks to Hand to Mind for having me. And we'll hang out here and answer any questions you have.
Good job, Maria. That was great. I do have a couple. So
Okay.
The first is, do you have a book list?
Do I have
just a list on your website? Do you have a book list on your website?
Great question. So in Ramped Up Read Aloud, the book that I referenced, there's 101 read aloud experiences, the whole thing written out for you. So that's not on my website. Then on my website, under children's literature, I've started curating bibliographies of, like I have wordless books up there, kindness books up there. So I'm working on, up until this year, I was teaching full time and doing everything else. So I'm working on beefing up those lists. So yes, check out my website, look under children's literature, there's lists there. There are also lists from a few years ago of my favorite, like all best books of 2012, best books of, so there's quite a few lists there. But if you want to know the latest books, yeah, Twitter's where I pretty much try to tweet what I'm, like, here's some great books for whatever.
Awesome. Will there be a sequel to Ramped Up Read Aloud with more books and experiences?
Yes, if I could get it written, yes. Right now, the pub date is a year from right now, a year from March. So it will be actually, it will be Read Aloud connected to shared reading. So it will have Read Aloud experiences like Ramped Up, and then 2 bursts of shared reading to go back into that book. So yes, working on it.
The response to that, by the way, was yay.
Yeah, I'm having trouble seeing the chat, so. Or not?
Oh, well, probably because
It's okay.
I don't know if I shouldn't affect it, but sometimes
That's
it
okay.
is problematic.
Ask
Okay.
away, it's easier.
Okay. Do you use read alouds all day? Yeah. Do you use read alouds all day?
Yes, so I kept a read aloud tally for a decade, the last decade of my teaching. Many of my colleagues still keep it. I read an average of 3 to 5 read alouds a day. So that meant we always started the day with a read aloud. We typically read one for reading workshop as a mentor text, writing workshop as a mentor text. We usually read one after lunch. I read mainly picture books. There's nothing wrong with chapter books, love them, but I'm like needed to read picture books to my kids. So I'm a picture book expert. So we spent a lot of time, we would read them for science, social studies. Basically, I can't plan a lesson without a read aloud. I don't know how.
That's not a bad thing. Okay, and then the app. Can you just, we got a lot of questions about the app. Can you just make sure that they have the name?
Yes, it's called Novel. I'll put it in the chat. Novel Effect app. Did that go in there?
Awesome.
Yes, it's fun. It's one of our teacher librarian in our school introduced it to us last year, and I really didn't explore it until we started teaching virtually and I started recording read alouds, and it made just having that little music behind it makes it a lot more engaging.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
It's fun.
How do you connect your read alouds to content areas?
Oh, so how do you connect? So I really like science read aloud. So I just look for books on our science topics. So if we're reading plants, then I look for plant books. And if we're reading or talking about animals, I look for animal books. So just looking for those books that either will help students help build students' background about that topic, or extend beyond the science or social studies content. So just looking for picture books that will do that. And math also. My last 2 years of teaching, I had a teaching partner. I was a demonstration classroom, so people would come and observe, and then while I was debriefing, she would take over and teach. So I taught all of the literacy and she taught all the math. So she did a math read aloud in almost every lesson. And now I gave her all my math books. I gave her all my math read alouds.
That's awesome. I think that's it, Maria, let me just double check.
All right, and you can always reach out. People email me all the time and say, I'm looking for a book for, and usually I can answer it. And actually it helps me to see if I have books for whatever the topic is.
Absolutely. And you can visit our website, and the link to the handouts is in the chat. So just check that. I just sent it again to everybody. So thank you, Maria. I appreciate you joining us today. What a great session. She will be doing a follow-up blog for us in the next few weeks, so be on the lookout for that.
All right, thanks
and
everyone.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day, everybody.